Hello everyone, I'm John Martinez, back with the fifth and final part of the procedural building tutorial. If you've stuck with me this far, you should have a procedural building that you can control all of these different parameters for, and today we are going to be working on the materials of the building. But before we can do that, we're going to have to do a little bit of modification to our base units here, the little cubes that we have in the middle, because we cannot just select, say, the window part right here to apply the material to, since it is all just one big mesh rather than separate parts that we can select separately. If you're just coming into this tutorial series now, or you just want to start with this exact project file that I'm going to be using to make it easier for yourself, you can find it over on patreon.com/ltfilm, and you can support me there. Or once we've reached the end of the tutorial, you'll be able to find this project file here in all of its complete glory. Anyways, on to the tutorial. All right, so to get started, let's go into our modules, and then we can select any one of these modules here, except for the roof pieces, because obviously they don't need this little modification that we're going to be doing. So let's just say roof edge corner. And if we look at just this, this one little module that we have here, we have our windows on each side because this is a corner piece. And we can try and go ahead and add a material right here to our cube, but if we did that, we would only be able to add a material to the entire cube. So let's go ahead and add in a set material and just see what that looks like. Plug that in there and just put this under material like that. If we head on over to our render preview tab, it's obviously not doing a whole lot. And then we can change the color, and we have one material applied to the entire thing. That's including the window portion in here as well as this outside portion. But what we want to do is be able to have a brick material on the outside here and then a glass material on the inside. So that's where this whole modification thing comes in, so that we can actually select the inside part and select the outside part separately. To do this, we're going to actually have to just create another node group here. So go ahead and just select both of these, Control G to create a group. Come back out and we will rename this to base unit and go back in here. So what we're going to do is actually create a smaller cube inside of this and then use a series of extrusions based on the height and width of the windows to then just expand it out to our 1 meter going across and up and down and all that stuff. So since we want the dimensions of our inner cube to be based on the dimensions of our window, we're going to go ahead and add in a combine XYZ right here and hook that up to our cube, and that'll make it disappear because it's 0 all the way around, and hook up the inputs right there to the X and Y. Those will leave connected to the same input, and then the Z will obviously be its own input for the height. We'll name this one width and this one to height. That, and then come out here to our main group and then connect in the window width and height. I know I don't have it labeled here, but this is what it's going to be. And you can see that when we actually come over to any of our views, it is the exact same size as our windows on both sides. If we switch between the two views, it's the same. So that gives us our inner dimensions right here. And that's really the only two inputs that we need for this. And everything else from here is going to be based on extruding it from these properties that we have, from these two values, just to get it to equal 1 going across like that. We want this to be 1 unit wide going that way and 1 unit tall. So it's actually pretty easy. We're just going to take an extrude mesh, and I'm going to take these two right here and move them off to the side. Then put that extrude mesh in there, and it's doing something that looks vaguely right. Obviously it's way too much, and we're going to reduce that amount quite a bit. And it's extruding in all 4 directions, or 6 directions, I guess, at the same time. And right now we only want it to extrude along one direction, and then we'll extrude it again in the other direction and one more time in the Z direction. So first we're just going to extrude it along the X axis. So we'll take our normal and then use a separate XYZ and just look at the normal along the X axis, compare, and then take that X normal and say if the X normal is equal to 1. So set that there and set the X axis equal to 1 and extrude that. So if we do that, then you can see that it's only extruding along this axis right here. But we also want it to, extrude along the other direction so we don't have to have, 6 separate extrude nodes and everything. And we'll solve that by just taking a math node, putting it in there, and then setting it to absolute. And now it's extruding along both the negative and positive x-axes like that. But how much do we actually want to extrude it? Obviously, I've kind of set it to vaguely the right number here, but we need that to be procedurally controlled so that as the window is increasing in width, it is also increasing properly instead of just going up beyond like that. So we're going to take our window width, do a little bit more math to that, and take our width, plug it in here like this to the second value, and then we're going to subtract it from 1. And then take that and plug that into the offset scale. And that should make it so that it will always be procedurally controlled by the window width, but you can see that it's still not right. And that's just because it's extruding by the difference between the width and 1 on both sides, but we only wanted to do the equivalent of extruding it on one side. So we'll just take that and multiply it by 0.5, and that will get us to the exact right value all the time, no matter what the window width is. You see as it's going in and out like that, it is continuing to work. So good, that gets us our x-axis, or how wide it is along that axis. And now we just kind of duplicate this a few times for the y-axis and the z-axis. So take that, duplicate, bring it down there, plug our result here, and then because this time we only want to extrude along the y-axis, we're going to switch this from taking the x-axis, we're going to say take the y-axis instead, and plug in our little math right there, and that should give us the correct value as well. So if we just go in and out like that, you can see that that always works as well. And then finally, we're going to take the z-axis, because it's right now a little bit too short, and just kind of do the exact same thing. So we're going to duplicate this setup one more time, bring it down here, and switch out the y-axis for the z-axis in our little absolute value that we have right here. And then also, rather than taking the width input right there, because we're using the height value right here, we're going to need to control it with our height instead. So we'll take 1 minus the height, and that should be good. Let's make sure. Yep. All right. So we'll just go ahead and hook these up to this extrude node, and in theory, it should give us the right shape, except that it doesn't. It's giving us a little bit of a weird thing right here where it's only extruding the center face here, like, you know, from what we were doing from our original mesh like that. It's kind of extruding to there a little bit, but we would rather it extrude also all of this little border here that we have as well. So the way we fix that is just by bringing up the epsilon for our compare nodes a little bit, and that'll get us close enough. As long as we don't go too far, it should be good. So now we have a cube that is exactly 1 meter by 1 meter. And yeah, it's a little bit of a weird way of going about that, but what this allows us to do now is to actually use some Booleans to select for a different material on the inside of the window and on the outside of the window as well. So let's take a look at that. So one of the interesting things about the extrude mesh node is it has these little Booleans right here for the top and side of the extrusions. And what that essentially does is it basically outputs a true for things which are the top face, or the face that is kind of facing towards the extrusion. So going like back and forth between these two, the top face is this one right here, the one that actually gets extruded. And the side face is the little additional part that has been extruded on the side. It's not addressing this part right here. It's just saying, you know, as we go from, like, here's the corner of our cube like that, the side is all this additional stuff on the side from where it originally was to where it is now, like that. Kind of long-winded way of explaining it, but we can use that to our advantage, do some Boolean math to allow us to select for different materials based on what was originally there and what is there now. So let's go ahead and just take a look at our materials. Let's go into there, just bring that back. And right now we have one material applied to the whole thing. If we take our side output right here, so it's outputting a true for it. Let's just look at it like that. just the base unit, not the windows and all that stuff. So if we look at the side, what it's doing is it's outputting a true for all of the side stuff of the original extrusion. So this is the one that brings it from here to here. It just widens it along the x-axis. So let's go ahead and switch this to the surface rather than the 3D cursor. So it's outputting a true right here, here, and on the other side as well, like that. And that's pretty good for now. And you can see that it also, whenever we then do further extrusions, it carries that out to the material that is being extruded as well. So it gives us the positive x-axis right here, which we do want, and it gives us this negative x-axis, which we don't want. So we'll get rid of that in a little bit. For now though, we'll need to actually also separate out the y-axis right here. We want this to be selected, but not any of this on the top or bottom. And we'll do that with the extrude mesh sides from the last one, the one that extrudes the height, because once we have here all of the stuff along the sides, from a top-down view, it's the right size and everything, but we're just extruding it up like this, so we can use the sides to build in the extrusion selection right there, like that. I'll just show you. So if we just use this selection, it kind of does an opposite thing. If we kind of toggle back and forth between the two, you can kind of start to see where they're intersecting and how we can use that to our advantage. And of course, we're going to do that with a Boolean math. I'm going to take these two and bring them in here together. But then the question becomes, which one of these do we actually use? We have several options here. So we can just go through each one, and I'll just tell you right now that it's nor. And so this gives us something that's vaguely correct. We have our selections for the windows on each side, right here and here. And of course we have this on the top, which we'll get rid of. We have these on the sides that we'll get rid of. And we have it on the bottom that we want to get rid of as well. So we'll need some additional Boolean maths. These extrudes are no longer going to serve their purpose. Luckily though, this is just going to be easy by using some normals again, just selecting the faces, which are not which ones we want, positive and negative Z, and then negative X and positive Y. Just select those and get rid of those. Cut those out of the selection. So let's go ahead and add in another normal, separate X, Y, Z, connect that to there, and then add in a few compare nodes. So let's take our x-axis, for example. Right now we have it on the positive x, and we want to get rid of the negative x. Let's take x, plug it into there, set it to not equal, and set this to -1. So if we do that, it's going to take a positive result for everything that is not the negative x-axis, or the negative x facing face. Whatever. Anyways, it's going to output a true for everything except this face right here, which doesn't sound like what we want, but it'll make sense in a little bit. So let's actually just duplicate this twice, hook one up to the Y and one up to the Z. And for the Z, we're going to add a little bit more to that one because this one we don't really want to leave in any of the Z axes. We just want to get rid of all of them. So we'll set this one to absolute, set the Z axis to +1 because we want the absolute value of the Z axis to be equal to 1. That is, it'll make both the positive and negative equal to 1. And then the Y axis, we're going to leave that to -1. So we're going to combine all of these together using a series of Boolean maths again. Hook that up to there and that one up to there. Leave it on and do it one more time. Hook that and up to this one and hook this one into there. Now what this is essentially doing is it's outputting a true for everything that is not negative x. And then this one right here is outputting a true for everything that is not negative y. Let's see, do I have the... Okay, it looks like we're going to actually want to select for positive y right here. In our little Booleans, I think we're going to want to set that to a +1. We'll see in a second if that's right, because we want to get rid of this one right here. So anyways, it's outputting a true for everything that isn't this, and this one is outputting a true for everything that isn't this. And then when you combine those together with an and, what an and does, it says it's going to output a true here if the two input ones are both also true. They have to both be true. And since we have a not true here and a not true here, it's going to output a positive for everything that isn't this one and this one. So everything else except these two is going to be true. And then similar thing here, we're going to say everything that is not, basically everything that's not on the top or bottom, output a true for those. So when we combine it with the result of this one, this acts to cut out the top and bottom. So now we should have a true result for this, the negative y-axis, this side with the window, and this side with the window. Those should both be true. Everything else should be false. So let's add in another material, and let's go ahead and add in a random material for this. New material slot, new material, and change this one to blue. I don't know. Go ahead and switch this one over to blue, and right now it's overriding everything because it's just selecting everything. And if we just hook this up here, it's still not going to work properly because it's outputting a true for these two faces and overriding what we have coming on here for these two, and then leaving these faces alone, which we actually want to do the opposite of that. So first of all, we're going to have to actually figure out a way to combine the results of this Boolean right here and the output from here. So let's combine those together with yet another Boolean math and figure out what goes in each of those. Well, it's going to be yet another and node. Again, outputs a true only if all the inputs are true, if both of the inputs are true. So since this one outputs a false for right here, when we have it like this, it's outputting a false for this and, all the borders around this. We want to output that false, so it's going to make this all false. And then we're going to take another Boolean math and we're going to flip it. We're going to say right there and not. And what this will do is it'll take all of that and it's basically an invert node. So let's look at it and invert. So now this first material here, which we'll go ahead and rename this to glass, since we kind of know what it's going to be. And this one we will rename to brick because I want this to be a brick texture. Now we can see that we have a glass texture, or will have a glass texture along here and there, and then not along any of our other faces. So if we come out of here, look back at our window, let me erase all this for you so you can actually kind of see what's going on. So as you can see, it's adding all the materials to the right places, and as we change the size of it, that is also just procedurally being modified to include the right parts of it as well. But you can see there's a little bit of a weird glitchiness here. That's just because it's using the epsilon 0 for all of our selections here. Don't know why it's glitching out like that, but if we increase these to some non-zero value, then it should fix that pretty well. That one's already not 0. So now as we do this, there we go. It is procedurally working, and that's all good to go. So now that we have this good to go for, this one base mesh, or this one module right here for the roof edge corner, now we just need to apply this to all of our modules. That's why we did it in a node group. So I can just take it, Control-C that, and come into each of our modules and just replace them. So let's actually head out and look at the whole thing so that way we can actually see what's going on as I'm replacing them. You can see right there, it's applying properly to those, and then all the rest of them, we're going to get to those right now. So delete our cube right there. It gets rid of all those. Control-C, hook up the first two, which are the height and width. Combine those with our join geometry. Those are good. So head back out, duplicate, repeat, rinse and repeat. I will fast forward through all this for you. All right, so now that we've connected all of the base units that we have and everything is good, almost everything is correct except for the door right here. This is still different, and it's going to be different because the door itself is not, it's not the same as the windows. The windows are centered here and they're extruding out every direction we need them to, but the door is starting from here and extruding only upwards from there. So we're gonna have to do a little bit of modifications in order to make all of that work. Let's head into our door module, and it's pretty similar to the original node group. So we'll just go ahead and copy that in there and just click the single user copy like that. And we will rename this to door base unit. Now that we have that, we'll go ahead and hook up our width and height. And this one, will obviously be the door width and height. So here's our door width, comes out to this one. We'll hook that into there. And our door height is this dotted line, which we will hook up into the height input. Let's go ahead and replace that so we can actually see what we're working with. And you know what? It's almost correct, but that's where the modifications come in. So first thing we want to do is just come in here and get rid of the height input right there going into the original cube. And we'll just set this to 1, which makes it a little bit too big because it's extruding based on what we did before over in this extrude mesh. It's extruding along the z-axis, but it's already the proper height, so it's just going to do a little bit additional here, which we want to get rid of. We only want it to extrude along the top mesh in just a second from what you'll see, but for now, I'll just hide this extrude mesh so that it's roughly the right height. So the modification that we're going to be doing right here is going to be happening before the extrude mesh. We're going to take the top face here and squish it down so that it's at the same height as the top of our door frame. We're going to do that by taking a set position. We'll do that first. We'll add in a set position here and then only select the top face of our cube that we're going to create, that we have created here. So we're going to take normal separate X, Y, Z and then use that with a compare node. Take the Z axis and compare that to the value of 0. And if it's greater than 0, then we want it to output a true for whatever this is. So now, as I'm moving this up and down, the only thing that's being affected is the top face, and it's being locked in down here at the bottom level like this, and it's just moving it up and down like that. And what is that value that we're going to move it? Well, it's going to be based on the height, our door frame height, So we'll take a math, plug our height in here like this, and then subtract 1. And what this will do is it'll basically take the difference from the height of 1 right here that we have, It'll take the difference between this and the top of the frame and put that out as a negative number. And we're going to use that to set the position and move it down by whatever this number needs to be. So we'll combine X, Y, Z because we need to convert this to a vector, obviously, to change our offset here. Plug this into our Z axis and now plug this into the offset. And then now you can see that it is the exact same height as our door frame. And if I move the door frame height up and down, it responds procedurally to that. So that gets us pretty close, but now we need to then extrude it back up again to make it fit within our 1 by 1 by 1 cube. So if we just unmute that, it isn't quite there because it's extruding equally on both sides. But what we would like for it to do is to actually extrude not this bottom side and kind of just move this up here to the top like that. So first thing we're going to do is mute this absolute. And what that'll do is it'll say, rather than looking at both positive and negative values and treating them as positive values when you're doing your compare, because right here it's +1 at the top and -1 at the bottom, the absolute converts this to a +1, but by muting it, we're actually saying it's -1. So anywhere it's equal to 1, which is this top face, that's what you're going to extrude. Makes sense so far? I hope so, because then we need to now add this in to the top here. And the reason it's not working is because we have multiplied by 0.5. In other words, we've taken this difference here and said, well, don't do the whole thing, only do half of it. Just get rid of that and voila, it works now. So now that we have all that, it looks pretty good and it's actually working really well. But let's look at our materials and see what's going on here. Again, we have, you know, front and side things, and that's just because it's using the same Booleans that we were using before. We can actually simplify this a little bit by, you know, we can just simplify this a little bit by just using the x-axis, because that's the one our door is on. Let's just take a look at the door right here like this. So the door is on the positive x-axis, and we want to get rid of this negative x-axis face. And the reason for that is just because, you know, if because, you know, if the door is on the corner or something, you don't want this to be just a random door material without there being a door frame there, because, you know, the door can move a little bit. So let's just actually get rid of all the Booleans. It'll be easier if we just get rid of everything and kind of start this over. It's really similar to what it was before, but a little bit simplified. And it'll be easier if we just start with nothing from scratch. All right, so we want to be able to set a material for the inside of the door and a separate material for every other face on the outside, including this right here, even though it's on the same side. So the first thing we want to do is just set it so that only things along the positive x-axis can possibly be selected as part of the door material, because, you know, we don't want anything along here or on the back or whatever to be that. So we're going to do that by taking our separate XYZ and then put it into a compare node, and then plug the x-axis into the that right there, and then set it to equal 1. So that way only wherever the x-axis is equal to 1, in other words, this face right here, it'll output a true result. And if we just look at that, you know, plug it into our bricks material, you can see that it is outputting a different material for this side than from this side. But now we want to be able to separate out this side from this side right here. And we're going to use our extrude mesh, and this time our top input right there. So let's go ahead and add in a Boolean math. Plug that right there. We'll take this, plug it into the bottom. Go ahead and plug in our Boolean math right there, move that to the bottom, and then take the top output of our first extrude mesh. Remember, we have 3. Take the first one and plug that into there. Now you can see that we have a separate material for the inside and outside, but which one is which? Well, if we head over to our materials, you can see that the brick is the one that's blue. So it's inverted right now. We can fix this by actually just switching the materials to brick and glass like that. So it's outputting a glass material here and a brick material there. And then obviously we're not going to use a glass material for this door, unless you want a glass door. I don't know, I'm not going to judge. We'll switch this one. We'll create a new material here, rename it from glass to door. Let's go ahead and set the color to something like, oh, I don't know, green like that. And we will switch our set material to door. So now we have a door material on the inside, our bricks material will be on the outside. And let's just go all the way out after we delete that cube. Let's go all the way out to our top level and take a look at that. Now you can see that we have one continuous material going all the way across. Windows are a separate material, our door is a different material, and we can add in a material for our window frames and for our roof as well. So let's go into our floor module, our window base, and for all of this stuff, all of our window base, remember this is the window frames. I call it the window base, but it's the window frames. We will add in a set material and add in a new material, create a new one, call this window frame. Select that right there. Let's just add this to another random color, you know, purple like that. Now all of our windows are our window frames are a different color. And head back out one more time to the roof. Add in a material here, so set material. Plug that in like that. Add another material. Call this one roof. Select it right there, and then let's change the color to something different like yellow. And we'll need to add this to our roof edge as well. So take our roof edge, add this onto the overhang, because this is why we create node groups, so that we can just do this rather than having to set it for all of them. Create that, call it roof, and of course the roof edge corner is a separate thing because we had a little modification for the corner. Set material, Call this one roof. All right, so those are all good. And our door module, for the door frame, we're just going to use the same material as the window frames. You can create a separate material for that, but I'm just going to use the same material as the window frames. For this, we'll just put it in there before our join geometry. In other words, before this, because we don't want to overwrite what we've done here. Set this one to window frame, and let's actually just rename that from window frame to just frame, since it's door and window frame. And let's just go ahead and add in glass back to our list that we have here. We don't want to create a new one, just put that back in there so it's in there. Move that up to the top, then we'll put our frame right there. Then the brick will come next, followed by the door, and then finally the roof. All right, so now that we have all of that and it's ordered in a way that kind of makes sense, let's go on over to our shading tab and start working on the actual materials. Let's go on over to glass and start working on the materials. First, we need to actually make sure that we have the proper render engine. So we're going to set it to cycles, put it on GPU compute because I have a GPU that actually works with this thing. And let's look at it. Obviously it looks really bad because, you know, we just have our normal background lighting. We don't have any other lights. So first we're just going to add in a sky texture real quick. Plug this into our color like that, and that gives us something that we can at least use to work with. So let's head back over to our object. We're set to the glass material. First thing we want to do is get rid of it and actually use in a glass BSDF. We'll plug that in like that. There's really not a whole lot that you need to do here. We're going to mess with the colors a little bit. First, we can just bump up the roughness a little bit, not very much. We want it to be pretty rough, something like, or we want it to be pretty. We want it to be pretty smooth, but you know, don't want it to be a perfect mirror. Index of refraction, you can leave it at 1.45. 1.51 I found looks pretty good, and it also works for like window glass. You can Google different kinds of glass material if you want. I don't know, it's not super important. First thing we want to do though is add in a little bit of variation to our color. Right now it's just one color. You could darken it a little bit. The darker you make it, the darker the windows are, kind of like they're tinted somewhat. So we'll add in a color ramp. We'll set it to some gray values. We don't want pure black. We want it maybe right about there. And the top value, we'll bring it to something like that. Really subtle gradient like that. Then we'll add in a noise texture. Plug that in from our factor into there. And where do we want this noise to come from? Well, we're just going to use our Node Wrangler add-on, press Ctrl-T, and rather than using generated, we will use object coordinates. Let's actually just look at the noise texture. So first, let's actually bring this back down to black and white so we can kind of see what the shape of it is looking like vaguely. Bring these in so we can get a little bit more contrast. Right now you can see that it's actually behaving a little bit oddly in that they are all exactly the same. And the reason for that is because it is still instances. This is the big problem with geometry nodes when you're working with instances. Right now it's actually using the same texture coordinates for each individual cube because it's treating, I don't know the math. I don't know how to explain it, but in conclusion, really the solution, the easy one, is just to come out here to the top level and just realize instances. If we plug this in here, now it's actually treating the entire thing as one big object with all these vertices rather than duplicates of a single object with a single texture coordinate for that object. Small thing, big thing actually. Anyways, now that we have that, we can actually kind of come in here, mess with the size. I don't want there to be a whole lot of detail in here. So let's reduce that a little bit. That's all probably pretty good. Bring that way back out. Again, subtle things here. We're just bringing it out like that. Bring that up. Then we'll hook this into the color output and take a look at that. You can't really see it right here in the live render like this. Once you actually have a bunch of, you know, duplicated buildings, over here and over here, all over the place, and you're seeing actual reflections in there, and it's actually a full high quality render, you'll be able to see that. Right now, not a huge deal, but just kind of on the same note, we're going to add a little bit more extra detail via Musgrave texture. If you've seen the Ian Hubert tutorial, you know what I'm talking about here. Add that in there and add in a bump node. Plug this in to the height, plug it in that into the normal, and watch as it looks awful really quickly. And that's just because you need to bump down the strength quite a bit. Bump down the strength and the distance. We'll start from 0 and then kind of work our way up a little bit. You know, something like that. You can see there's a little bit of shading differences. Really small thing. You can test that on, you know, different size things like that. We'll just bump up the scale quite a bit. You know, give it something like that. Detail. I don't want a whole lot of detail. And, you know, a little tip here, as you're doing all this, you can check what you're doing, kind of like what I did with the noise texture, to see the shape of it and everything. You can check all of that by just singling out the texture itself, and I'll output it as a black and white or whatever it is that it's going to be, and just play around with things like that. And I'd say let's add in a little bit of a extra variation here. So I'll add in a mix RGB, plug one into, not into the height, plug that into the color, plug this one into the color, and let's take a look at that. First, we want to change the scale of this, so something like that. Details, good, all that's good, whatever. Now, as we go between the two, you can see it changing between the two that we have. Let's just set this, I don't know, maybe add something like that. And as we do this, it's adding in all that lightness to it. Subtle things here, I don't know. Just gives it a little bit extra detail compared to like that. You can see it just gives it a little bit more warble to it, as Ian would call it. Subtle thing. Hard to see, you know, out here in the live render. Anyways, glass material, I call it good. Onto the frame. So from here, we're going to do similar thing. We're going to use noise texture for our, you know, we're obviously not going to be purple. Add in another color ramp. Plug our noise texture into there. Add in a texture coordinates, set to object. Plug this into our base color, and we'll just give this a little bit of, let's actually take a look at that first. This one, it's hard to see because it's kind of a really small thing. But we'll go ahead and bump up our scale quite a bit on this one. I'm thinking it's, you know, maybe dirty, something like that. I don't know. Up the detail just a wee bit. Roughness. There we go. I don't know. That looks good to me. Distortion, leave it the same. That looks pretty good. Let's give it a little bit more contrast and just change the colors. Now we'll actually go back out since we're using this for the color. Bring the color down quite a bit. Let's make it kind of roughly black. And this one not quite black. Give it a little bit of color, and let's make it blue-ish. Very unsaturated blue. Same thing for this one. Reduce the saturation quite a bit. And when you zoom out, you can't really see a whole lot. You kind of can. That's probably just because this is pretty far from that. If you make them really similar, you can't really see it, but it's kind of there. If you zoom in, you can see it. There's a little bit of gradation in it, a little bit of stuff to look at. But that looks pretty good. Roughness, let's do something with the roughness here. We'll do the same thing with or use the same noise texture for this one. Plug that in there, and let's figure out how rough we want it. So the way I like to figure out roughness is to actually just not use our noise texture thing, figure out kind of a vague, you know, center value. If you can think of like when we're using the color ramp, it's going to have a minimum value and a maximum value, and everything is going to fall somewhere along this line. I like to just kind of figure out where the roughness is, like kind of figure out a center value, and then set the values on our color ramp to be roughly equidistant on either side of that. So let's figure out where our roughness should be. It's not going to be super smooth, so maybe something like that, 0.8. I don't know, looks good to me. So we need to raise our color ramp values. First, get rid of the saturation on both of them. We don't want that. And then so 0.827. So let's set this one to say 0.9. And then the bottom one, we're setting this one to 0.8 even. That's pretty good. It's not super exacting. So that'll get you your frame. It looks pretty good. When you zoom out and get all that stuff, it'll look better. Brick. Here is the fun one. This one's going to be a little bit more involved because it's actually going to use textures that are, across the entire thing rather than just solid colors like we were for this. So let's go ahead and add in a brick texture because that's kind of going to be the base for everything that we're doing here. Plug this into our color and just see what happens. It looks not good, for lack of a better word. First thing, if you'll notice, is we just have solid lines running top to bottom, more dense lines here and there, and then the brick texture is actually properly being applied to the bottom of our building, but we don't want that. So texture coordinates, you guessed it, set that to object, and then we'll come on over to our rotation, and this is where we'll kind of actually fix all of that. So we're going to set our rotation to 90 degrees along the x-axis, and what this is going to do is it's going to get the front facing wall pretty good. It's going to look good, but now the side wall is going to be this stretched thing going across like that, and we'll just solve that by rotating it 45 degrees along the y-axis. It's not the y-axis based on, the way it is currently as you see it on screen. It's the y-axis based on what it was when it was like, it's complicated. You can experiment on your own and figure this out, but it's 45. And as I'm rotating it, you can see how it changes. 45 just gets it so that it is equal on both the front and side of the building. So now that we have that set properly, let's come on over to our brick texture and start working on the colors for this one. We want some vaguely brick colors, so, kind of a reddish color, pretty dark, and maybe another one that's a little bit more orange, something like that. That looks, I think it still needs to be a little bit darker, don't you? There we go, like a brownish red color. Get a little bit of variation on there. Maybe make this a little bit brighter. I don't know, you can kind of figure it out on your own. It's kind of hard to tell since our, roughness and all that. Let's actually just make it really rough right now so you can see it a little bit better. Let's make this one a little bit brighter, maybe something, you can play with the colors yourself and figure out something that works a little bit better. Something like that for now is probably good. Offset we'll leave, frequency we'll leave, this way we get this kind of alternating brick pattern. That looks good to me. Let's bring up the scale just a little bit. Make these a little bit smaller bricks. Something like that. Our mortar size, this is going to control, how much space is between each bricks. If we set it to 0, there's none. The default value of 0.02 looks pretty decent to me. Mortar smoothness, this pretty good. Bias good. Brick width good. Row height, all this looks pretty good. The shapes of the bricks are pretty good to me. I'm pretty happy with them. We can touch the color up a little bit later, but that looks pretty good for now. So we want to take this and mix it with, of course, you guessed it, a little bit of noise. And we're going to use this also for our roughness as well. We're going to mix it with a little bit of noise, and then we're going to use a little bit of noise for the roughness as well. And then we're going to use the brick texture for a little bit of bump mapping. So that way, bricks aren't perfectly flat, smooth things like this. They actually have, they go in a little bit during the mortar part and stick out a little bit during the rest of it. So let's go ahead and just work on that first, using our bricks to drive the bump mapping here. First, of course, we're going to have to add in a bump node and then plug that into our normal. Nothing changes because nothing's happening. And let's take a look at our brick texture. If we look at the factor output right here, you can see it's outputting a 0 for all of this stuff and a 1 for all of the mortars, which is going to actually kind of do the opposite of what we want it to do. We would rather it output a 1 for all of this stuff and then a 0 for the rest of it. And that'll kind of, 1 is where it pushes out and 0 is where it pushes in or really doesn't do anything. I don't know. So we'll go ahead and just actually invert that. Plug that into our invert node right there. And then plug this into our bump node. Let's switch back to the principled. Plug this into the bump node and then see how it does it a little bit. You can see it pretty well right here on this sidewall. Looks like it's sticking out a little bit. This is where you can kind of play with your mortar smoothness. If you increase that to something like 0.5, it gets a little bit smoother like that. That actually looks pretty good. Maybe bump it down a little bit, 0.3. So we do that, and then let's go ahead and just obviously decrease the strength quite a bit. Roughly, yeah, that looks pretty good. And then our distance, I like to just zero out the distance and then slowly increase it from there. That looks pretty good to me. And then we're gonna add in a little bit of noise as well to kind of add in some variation on top of that so they're not just perfectly flat bricks. So let's add in a noise texture. Hook this up to our mapping node for the vector. And we're going to use 3 different levels of this for kind of different noise shapes going on here. We're gonna have a large form noise, something that affects, you know, larger portions of it, and then small scale and medium scale as well. So let's go ahead and just take a look at this noise and see what it looks like. We'll bump this up to 2.7, and that'll give us something that looks a bit like that one, and a color ramp for contrast. Just pull it in a little bit, make it a little bit more punchy like so. If you do that, you can actually see what we're doing. All right, so that looks pretty good for there. We don't want a whole lot of detail when you're working at large scales like this. I don't want a lot of detail in there, but that looks pretty good to me. Take it, Control-Shift-D to duplicate it. And this one, we're going to bump up the scale a little bit to 20. Now we're getting much smaller pieces of noise right here. We're gonna add in a little bit of detail back in. And that looks pretty good as well. Let's maybe adjust the cutoff points of this a little bit. And one more time for the really small scale stuff. We're going to switch this one to 35. So if we go to here, you can see it's a little bit even smaller scale. Maybe we'll bump this one up a little bit. Yeah, something like that. So then as we're going between the 3 of them, you can see how it goes from big scale to medium scale to small scale like that. And then we will use a little bit of mixing to combine all of those together. So we will mix RGB, take the first one, mix it with the second one, set this to add. So let's look at it. Here's the, when we set this to 0, it's just looking at this first one right here. As we add in some, it's adding in like that. It's lightening the dark parts and obviously the light parts too. But, you know, kind of like that. You can get hints of the larger scale noise, but most of it's the small scale stuff. We will duplicate this, Shift D, connect that there, and connect in the bottom one like that. And similar thing here, as you do that, as you add in this one, it gets rid of sort of this first one, kind of just replaces it with the even smaller scale. So as you move that around, you can kind of see how it changes that a little bit. And, you know, that looks pretty good to me. And one final add to bring this in with that. This one, we're actually going to switch it to mix rather than add. And then as we go back and forth, you can kind of see how it's replacing one with the other. So for this, we'll just go ahead and bump up this a little bit. As we mix it, it's getting rid of the original and replacing it with the noise a little bit. So, you know, something like that probably looks pretty good. It's hard to tell when you're looking at it on here, so let's just go ahead and connect it there and see what it looks like. As you come in here, you can see, especially along the sides, it's hard to see when it's like, you know, facing direct sunlight that's just coming in like that. It's easier to see when the sunlight is kind of coming off the side. Here we can actually mess with the strength a little bit till we get something that looks a little bit more realistic. Maybe bump up the factor on that. You know, if we go all the way, you're just seeing the noise. If we go all the way this way, you're just seeing the bricks. So we want something kind of in between the two. You know, if you look really closely, obviously it's not perfect, but the whole point of this thing is just to build a world for world building purposes. I think that looks pretty good. If you're looking at it as part of a larger environment, it's going to work real well. So now that we have that, and that looks pretty good, let's work on our roughness a little bit. For this, we're just going to use some more noise. And this does get a little bit messy here. Let's just add in a noise and color ramp. Hook that up to there and see what this looks like. We're going to bump this one up quite a bit because this is going to be for our roughness. So we just want it to be some random value, like 50. And then that way we'll get a little bit of variation within what we actually have here. Detail, let's, I don't know, bump that down. Yeah, bump it down to 0. Looks fine to me. Roughness, what does that do? Nothing. All right. So we'll bump that down as well. Anyways, we have that. So let's figure out what our roughness value is that we want vaguely. Let's get rid of our bump node for now, just so that it's not taking up a lot of computational resources, and figure out what we want the roughness to be. Obviously, if you increase it, it becomes a mirror brick, which is not good. Increase it too far and it's bland. So something with a little bit of pizzazz to it. I don't know. 0.8 probably looks pretty decent to me. So we'll center these on 0.8. We'll plug in 0.75 for there. On the top one, we'll plug in 0.85. Plug this into our roughness. And now we're getting a little bit of noise. Again, hard to see. You can kind of see it like that. And then when we add in the bump nodes, and then it's all kind of starting to come together. Let's see if we, yeah, see, it's hard to tell when you're looking at it back and forth like this, but it's there. And when you're doing a full render, you might be able to see the difference. Small details, they help. All right, and then let's also just mix this with our brick texture as well. Plug this in here. We'll just use it to kind of lighten it just a little bit. Very small amount. Just gonna get a little bit of variation there as well. First, actually, let's just plug this directly in there rather than going through that, because this will only lighten it by a lot. This way we can get it without having to worry about lightening it a whole ton. You know, it's a process. It looks pretty good to me. I think that looks pretty good as a starting brick material. Mortar, we're going to leave black because that looks decent as is. All right. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Let's move on to the next one. Door. All right, door is going to be really simple. We're just going to change the color of it. We'll make it kind of a desaturated blue color. Let's make it blue. Pull down the saturation quite a bit. Maybe something like that. It is kind of hard to see because of the way the sun is shining on everything, what color it is. So let's go back to our world. Let's first of all move the sun down so that it's more of a sunset. I like sunsets, and let's rotate it so that it's not facing our door. You know, something like that. All right, back to the object, our door. So that looks pretty good, and we'll make it dark. Really small number, like, I don't know. That looks pretty decent to me. Choose your own values here, you know. Let's make it a metal door because why not? It's a metal door. Roughness. Yeah, sure. That looks good. All right. And then Last but not least, the roof. It will just be some generic concrete color. So let's make it, I don't know, more of a warm tone. Really desaturate it and pull down that a little bit so that it's something like that. Roughness, give it a really high roughness, and that's pretty good. I think that's good. It's good as a building. All right, let's go check our frames again. Our base color. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. So that is the end of the procedural building tutorial series. You now have a building that you can control all of these things for and make it whatever you want it to be, all procedurally. This series has been a long time coming and it has taken apparently forever to make. So thank you for sticking through to the end. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you find a way to use this in your own projects, let me know because I would love to see how you are using this. Just remember that this will be up on Patreon if you want to go and support me there, or if you want to just go through all 5 parts of this series and make it yourself, feel free to do that as well. Anyways, I am John Martinez, and this has been Learn Together Filmmaking.